Boba Fett isn't exactly lead character material. While the iconic character that is famous for standing around looking cool is, well, cool, Boba Fett is more of a supporting character. After all, his screen time in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi was minimal, and in the more recent Mandalorian Season 2, a show that's really good by the way, Fett was featured and received some solid development and was a neat supporting character in a show stacked with good supporting characters sans Cara Dune. He was a cool presence and complemented the titular Mandalorian character and didn't hog the spotlight like White Fragility on Fox News. His characterization was in support of a greater narrative, and as a result, the character that is Boba Fett could focus on what befitted him best, which, as stated before, was standing around and looking cool, like science fiction Ferris Bueller. Fast forward to the recent Book of Boba Fett, and things have clearly changed. In Disney Plus's latest Star Wars show from showrunner Robert Rodriguez, yes, that Robert Rodriguez, Boba Fett is given the lead spot and takes on the weight of the show's full narrative, sort of. Which is a far cry from his past representation, because now Boba Fett gets placed in the hero role for the first time. But sadly, this doesn't exactly work, mostly because the Book of Boba Fett as a show is very inconsistent in terms of its execution. While the Book of Boba Fett has some fun action and reveals, the show repeatedly runs into some major hurdles. There's some awkward editing, some of the action sequences are awful, the sequences featuring CGI Luke Skywalker venture into uncanny valley territory, there is the fact that the audience doesn't understand Boba Fett's character motivations for more than half of its 7-episode runtime, and then there's all the tie-ins and crossovers with The Mandalorian that dilutes the fact that the Book of Boba Fett is supposed to be about Boba Fett, because, you know, it's in the title. The Book of Boba Fett? More like the Book of bullfuck. And with that, the Book of Boba Fett has a lot of problems, and while I'd hesitate to call it bad because some things are enjoyable, it is clearly far removed from approaching the territory of being good. It is honestly a mess, kind of like my bedroom, because I'm a fucking disaster. The Book of Boba Fett's problems start with its story, just like everything. The plot follows Boba Fett as he tries to take the deceased Jabba the Hutt's place as Tatooine's resident crime lord supreme, even going so far as to living in Jabba's old palace and keeping some of his workforce. Yet where Jabba ruled with fear, Boba Fett desires to pull a Pantera and rule with respect. He wants to have people obey him out of loyalty rather than because they feared for their lives and might be fed to the Rancor. He wants to be a better class of criminal, if you will. But this goal runs into a bit of a snag. See, as Boba Fett is attempting to accrue power, the Pike Syndicate, which runs a vast spice mining operation across the galaxy, because you better believe there are Dune references in this show, have set their sights on Tatooine, and from there Boba Fett must balance a volatile political climate all while accruing allies like the handy Fennec Shand, the Mandalorian, and others in order to combat the Pike Syndicate and their various henchmen. This story doesn't really work, mostly because Boba Fett overall isn't that interesting of a main character. As stated before, he's always been more style over actual substance, like Elon Musk, but much less of an asshole. He is more meant to support a story rather than lead one. And while sure, the show could have given our dear friend Boby some good revelatory characterizations, this isn't what we ultimately received in the Book of Boba Fett. For more than half the season, there isn't much in the way of actual character motivation for our lead character. In the first half of the season, we don't understand why Fett desires to be a crime lord, why he is willing to go through all this trouble just to rule the blasted rock of Tatooine. And this is kind of important, because Fett's rationale for this should inform the central conflict of the whole damn show. It is kind of necessary in order to inform the viewer of what the stakes are and why we should care about what's happening on screen. Honestly, it's storytelling 101. But unfortunately, the Book of Boba Fett is missing this core piece of context for more than half the show. And as a result, I honestly didn't care about a lot of Boba Fett's political maneuvers or the action sequences because the show didn't really give me a reason to. Sadly, this show is narratively flat. Admittedly though, there are a bunch of flashback sequences that try to deliver this missing context. When Boba Fett blasts himself out of the Sarlacc's intense digestive tract, an action that normally requires an epic fuckton of Pepto-Bismol, our friend Boba Fett is left for dead, but he's eventually saved by the Tuskens, and from there he eventually fosters a friendly relationship with them, all to the point that this subplot gives the show some heart and is honestly more interesting than the primary plot where Fett tries to be Tatooine's new crime lord. It had a lot more character to it and was actually fairly interesting. But sadly, this doesn't last. The Tusken subplot eventually ends mid-season, and honestly still doesn't give us the much needed context for Boba Fett's character motivations in the main plot. Like, we get that he went through a lot when it came to surviving the Sarlacc pit and living among the Tuskens, because that was honestly a life-changing experience. But sadly, there isn't much connective tissue between Boba Fett's dances with wolves, life among the Tuskens, and his desire to be the new leader of Tatooine's criminal underworld, save for our early run-in with the Pike Syndicate, which admittedly could have informed the plot here if executed properly, but it isn't because the Pike Syndicate wasn't presented as the primary antagonist during the flashback sequences. And when in present-day scenes, Boba Fett eventually reveals that his whole reason for being a criminal boss is so that he can be a more noble ruler compared to the normal intestinal worms like Jabba the Hutt, which honestly isn't a very satisfying reason given all the time spent in the flashback scenes. And while yes, Fett did see and potentially learn true honorable leadership among the Tuskens, the show never ties this into an overall distaste for his old corrupt crime bosses, save for a couple throwaway lines later on in the series. And truly, that is not good enough, mostly because the overall thesis here is jumbled and isn't sharp like it should be. Its edge is dulled. The events of the later episodes featuring The Mandalorian don't help matters either. As the internet knows by now, The Mandalorian takes center stage in the season's back half, which on the one hand is cool. I love Pedro Pascal, and both seasons of The Mandalorian are among the most creative ventures Disney has made since acquiring the Star Wars franchise, save for the awesomeness that is The Last Jedi, a movie that I will always defend to the death despite how the fuck awful The Rise of Skywalker did that film dirty. But here is the issue. This isn't The Mandalorian. This is supposed to be Boba Fett's show, or Book, rather. He is supposed to be the star, yet he isn't present at all in Episode 5 and doesn't even speak a single line in Episode 6, which is especially problematic seeing as the 7th episode is the final one, meaning that our lead character is notably absent from the action and drama leading up to the penultimate episode. The Mandalorian essentially takes over the show, and on the one hand I enjoy seeing Mando, Grogu, Ahsoka, and all the other characters that appeared in The Mandalorian, but this isn't supposed to be The Mandalorian, and the fact that he's interjected into the story for what essentially acts as Mandalorian Season 2.5 really undermines the overall narrative and steals the spotlight away from our lead. And sure, I get that Boba Fett appeared in The Mandalorian Season 2, that inclusion complemented that show's story rather than completely overtake it, which is unfortunately what happened in the Book of Boba Fett. Mando takes over the show, and that is a problem. Another problem with The Mandalorian's inclusion is in regards to the portrayal of CGI Return of the Jedi era Luke Skywalker, the nightmare fuel that keeps on invading my waking dreams. Because let's be honest, the CGI Luke looks bad here, like it's in the uncanny valley territory and triggers my evolutionary fight or flight instincts. Sure, he almost looks lifelike, but his actions are robotic and his voice, which was created by using a piece of digital software, something that brings its own ethical problems because why not just hire a voice actor, obviously, is detached of any emotion. And while I understand that Jedi take a vow to not let their emotions cloud their judgment or whatever, even CGI Luke goes too far here. There is no humanity in his stoic non-starter for performance. It's really bad, and honestly raises the question of why not just hire a fucking voice actor? After all, they're very good at what they do, damn it. There's an artistry to the craft, something that a voice software program like this obviously doesn't have, because it sucks, and it's unethical. Bringing the criticisms back to some more nuts and bolts issues, some of the Book of Boba Fett's action sequences are bad as well. In fact, there are two sequences in the middle of the season in particular that either aren't executed well or tonally contradict the narrative weight of the moment. One of these is the Mod Espa speeder chase, and the other features Boba Fett bumbling around trying to stop a robot lookout while he is invading Jabba's palace. In terms of the speeder chase, it's really corny in all the wrong ways, and it is very slow moving, which is a problem for a fucking chase sequence. Where most chase sequences go 100 miles per hour, this seems to be going a steady 35. Hell, I'm sure Forrest Gump could outrun some of the vehicles in this quote-unquote chase sequence. And when it comes to seeing the once glorious bounty hunter Boba Fett look like a fool by a tiny robot, it is kind of embarrassing and contradicts the severity of the scenes before and after it, because once again, he is invading Jabba's palace. It's kind of a serious event that's important for Boba Fett's whole aspiration to be Tatooine's most notable crime lord. It's a big deal, and that quote-unquote action sequence really undermines that. It sucks. On one final note, I want to bring up my overall concern to Disney's handling of the Star Wars IP in general. Since the release of Star Wars The Force Awakens back in 2015, God, it was that long ago? Am I an old? Disney's handling of Star Wars has mostly stuck to formula. They have either been Star Wars stories featuring traditional Star Wars storytelling formats, i.e. important bloodlines, lightsabers, and planet-destroying superweapons, or they've really emphasized fan service. And while there have been great stories that break this mold, see the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian and The Last Jedi, Star Wars really feels formulaic lately, and that is honestly a disservice to the property. After all, Star Wars can provide a big canvas for capable creative voices. Like, there are so many different factions, planets, histories, peoples, and time periods where someone could craft a Wall-E original tale with. There is literally a whole galaxy's worth of stories to explore. Yet Star Wars has mostly been stuck within the same 60-year time period, the same good and evil factions, the same planets, and the same important bloodlines and iconic characters. And honestly, I believe Star Wars can do better than this, because there's just so much opportunity out there, and it is truly being squandered here. And this ultimately describes the Book of Boba Fett as well. It's yet another story on the all-too-familiar planet of Tatooine during the same time span. It has lots of fan service and nods to the original trilogy, and it stars yet another legacy character instead of innovating with a new original protagonist. And with that, this show is ultimately a mimicry of this once bold and innovative series that changed blockbuster filmmaking forever, abandoning its creative ingenuity in favor of a mediocre spacefaring tale. And on the whole, the series recycles Star Wars iconography without doing anything new or notable with it. It is a very rough show. Overall, the Book of Boba Fett isn't very good. While it has some fun moments, features some good Mandalorian content, and Boba Fett still looks cool, the Book of Boba Fett is just so underwhelming. Boba Fett's character motivations aren't given proper context, the main plot is flat, the editing and the prominent focus on the Mandalorian, while fun, undermines the idea that this is a Boba Fett story. CGI Luke Skywalker is robotic for all the wrong reasons. Hell, even the droids have more personality, to be honest. Some of the action isn't executed well, and this show exemplifies Disney's often lackluster handling of this storied saga. And due to all these reasons, the Book of Boba Fett isn't very good, and is honestly a very unnecessary chapter in the Star Wars mythos. Hopefully the next Star Wars show will do better. And with that, that was the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you think of the Book of Boba Fett. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto my Discord server and onto this credit sequence, and at least $5 a month allows you to make review requests. The link is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones, and David, Samantha, Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.